Okay, I think that is enough time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to Adobe Premiere Pro Color Correction. My name is Nikki and I am an instructor at the Harrington Library. Today I will be assisted by my chat facilitator, Jess. Jess, would you mind saying hi?
Hello. And also really quick, Nikki, your screen is super zoomed in.
Oh no. Okay, here, give me one moment. I'm going to stop my share and reshare real quickly.
I think that'll fix it.
Yes, one moment. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's try this again. Does that look better?
No, it is like super zoomed in on the star.
Okay, give me one moment here. Sorry, everyone. Let me see here. Okay, I'm gonna pause.
I just didn't want you to continue without.
No, thank you. I appreciate it so much. It's so weird because
But
in
yes,
my,
hello. I am Jessica. I am your Zoom tech. So if you have any questions or are struggling to see anything, go ahead and type in your question in the chat, and I'm happy to help. And then if you have any technical questions while we're doing this today, I will let Nikki know.
okay, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try to share a different screen real quick and then hop to the screen that I need. I'm gonna see if that fixes it. So, couple difficulties here. Okay,
Oh,
be
that's the
my dog. Okay, all right, let me try to hop to the correct screen now. Let me stop. Okay, how are we looking? That
perfect.
okay, awesome.
All right, take
Okay,
over.
cool. All right, thank you guys for sticking through that with us. Some good technical difficulties to get us started. All right, but some ground rules before we do get started. Your mics have been muted on purpose. So if you do have program-related questions that you would like to like to ask, you can do that at the bottom of your screen. You'll see an option for chat or Q&A, and you can access that and ask through there. Your text is only going to be seen by staff here, not all attendees. Any inappropriate behavior will result in your removal from this virtual program. We will try to answer the questions as we go along, but there will be time for Q&A after the lesson is over. A recording of this class will also be sent out and posted to the library's YouTube channel at a later date. So today we will be covering the basics of color editing footage in Premiere Pro. We'll be focusing on color correction and then some of the beginning tools that are available for color grading as well. So this class is not intended to be an intro to Premiere, so I'm not going to be going into the details of importing or exporting clips, the different workspaces, or the mechanics of the software. However, this is still a class that's intended to be at the beginner level because we will just be covering the basics of color editing. Premiere is quite the powerhouse when it comes to video editing. So once you practice with the basics, there are a plethora of ways that you can alter the colors and tone of your footage with Premiere. Just as a quick side note, if you are new to Premiere and would like something like an intro to Premiere, we do have a recording up on the Plano Public Library YouTube page of a past session of an intro to video editing with Premiere Pro class. And that does cover the basics of importing and exporting and some of your basic editing tools. So if you'd like to watch that, we will put a link in the chat to the Plano Public Library Technology Training playlist on YouTube. And you can follow along. Today's class will be posted there later, so you can also follow along with today's class later at that link. So we do also have some exercise files. If Jess will please drop those into the chat for everyone. If you would like to follow along with today's class, if you happen to have access to Adobe, you can also get a free 7-day trial of Premiere through the Adobe website. And also currently, just so y'all are aware, all Plano Public Library locations offer access to the Adobe Creative Cloud. So you can actually access Premiere Pro for free anytime at the library with your library card on our Adobe stations. And in addition to those Adobe stations, we also do have digital creation spaces at Parr, Haggard, and Harrington libraries. And these spaces have the entire Adobe Creative Cloud suite on there, along with some other really cool digital creative software. And you also have access to things like cameras and audio equipment. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so even though it isn't an intro to Premiere class today, I do think it is always nice to review the software that we're working with. So what is Premiere Pro? Today, we're going to be focusing on some of the basic tools Premiere has that will help you edit color in your footage or video products. But Premiere is a timeline-based, non-linear video editing software application. So it is an industry-leading software that can be used for a variety of projects. It's used often in online videos, for commercials, television, and even feature films. So before we start, I also think it's important to talk about the concepts of color correction and color grading, how they're different, and then how they ultimately work together. So let's go ahead and start with color correction. So the end goal of color correction is to make footage appear clean and real. So as if the viewer's eyes were the camera and they were viewing the scene in real time. This can often be accomplished through the adjustment of white and black levels, exposure, contrast, and white balance, all of which we're going to talk a little more in depth once we actually get into Premiere. But to the right of the screen here, you can see these are some of the controls we'll see in Premiere for just basic color correction. Whenever I'm editing videos for the library, I pretty much only do this color correcting step. I don't go into color grading because I just want to make our video clips seem as natural as possible and kind of like you're here with us in the library. So after color correction, you can move to color grading. And so this is another just color editing concept, and it's an important step that can be used to create and keep a consistent atmosphere throughout your projects. So this can be accomplished by manipulating colors to create and set a tone or a mood or like a certain aesthetic that will help tell your story through your video and the colors. So think of some popular feature films. For example, The Martian, they rely really heavily on oranges and sepia tones, and that's all stuff they added in, not by color correcting, but by that color grading process. So they wanted to, make you feel like you were on Mars. Most Batman movies rely really heavily on like the blacks and the blues and the darker tones. And then if you've ever seen like a Wes Anderson film, he always utilizes really unique color grading to help tell a story through the tone of his footage. So color grading is really awesome, but it's definitely different than color correction. So I did just want to kind of cover the differences between those. They work hand in hand, and I'll give you guys some tips just on workflow as we move into Premiere. But there is also a lot that can be considered when you're beginning to color edit your projects. Knowing color theory, which is basically how you manipulate different colors to affect your audience's emotions and mood, is a really great concept to look further into as well if you're interested in all of this color editing. It's not a topic we really have the time to delve into today, just due to our time constraint. We could have a whole class on color theory. So we're not going to delve into that today, but I just wanted to throw that out there if you guys wanted to start looking into color theory, if you're interested in getting into editing and especially color grading your footage. Before we do start in Premiere, I want to set the expectation that we're not going to be coming out of class today with a completed project that flows together and looks beautiful. I just have a couple different clips that we are going to explore the different options that we have available to us in Premiere when it comes to color editing. So we're not going to think about color theory or trying to create a consistent look throughout our clips today. We're really just going to play around with our options, and I'm going to show you guys how the different settings change what we're seeing on the screen. All right, so I think we're ready to go ahead and open up Premiere and do some editing. So I'm going to close out of our PowerPoint here, and I'm going to navigate to Premiere, which I have pinned to my taskbar down here. While this is opening up, I'm going to go ahead and talk real quickly about a good rule of thumb to keep in mind when you are practicing color editing and creating your own individual workflow. So although I mentioned earlier, color correction and color grading often work hand in hand, I would strongly suggest that you always complete your color correction as the first step of your color editing workflow. You want to make sure that you have your exposure, your black and white levels just where you want them before you begin color grading. Otherwise, you might end up creating more work for yourself in the end because you haven't given yourself the best possible image to begin with. And so you kind of create a back and forth in your workflow if you're not doing that color correction first. All right, so Premiere has loaded for us here. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project, which we can find up here in the top left-hand corner. I am going to name my project. Again, up here in the top left-hand corner, I'm going to name it class, and then today's date, 3/13. Here, project location, I'm going to click on here and navigate to where I would like this to be saved in my Premiere Pro color corrections class project. Perfect. And then this is our import screen. These are all of our exercise files. If you guys follow that link that was dropped into the chat, you should find all of these that you can download to your own computer so that you can follow along. There's 5 total, so I'm going to go ahead and import all of them here. And I'm going to press create down at the bottom. Oh, it doesn't like, sorry. I forget that they don't like slashes in here. We'll do a dot. And it's thinking about it. There we go. Okay, so for class today, we are going to stay in our effects workspace. So if you are following along, you'll want to make sure window up at the in our top menu, if you'll click on that and head to workspaces, we are going to stay in the effects workspace, which is where I am now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm dragging all of these clips into our timeline. We will eventually do something with each of these clips. So I'm just going to go ahead and get them all drug in there right now. Before we hop into some of our options for color correcting, I did want to show a different workspace real quick. It's not a workspace we're going to be in today, but I want to show you the color workspace that Premiere Pro has. So again, up here at Window, Workspaces, Premiere has a color specific workspace. And in this workspace, you'll notice up here, this top left panel, it has highlighted the Lumetri Scopes panel. So this is a more advanced color editing option in Premiere that we're not going to talk about today, but if you're taking this class, you might be interested in the more advanced as well. So I wanted to mention that past just the basics, there is a lot of really cool options in Premiere for color editing. They have curve options and focusing on different color channels. So there's a lot that you can really do in Premiere. So again, we're just going to focus on the basics today, but I did just want to show that off because I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to hop back to my effects workspace. That is going to do for our basic color editing and correcting that we're going to be doing today. All right, so we are going to start off with the basic colors for our color correction, and we're actually going to start with the clip that is titled Cookies. So that was my third clip I pulled in. And what I'm going to go ahead and do, because I would like the panel where our edits are going to be showing up to be pretty big for you guys. So I'm going to make this larger on my screen in the hopes that you guys can see it really well when I'm making some of these adjustments. So I just enhanced the size of my program panel. It doesn't have to be that big if you're following along at home, but this is just so it will show up well in the program. Okay, and so now we'll see over here on the right-hand side, to the right of where we're viewing our image right now, we have different panels. So we have the effects panel, essential graphics, essential sound, and Lumetri Color is the fourth option down. So Lumetri Color is where we're going to be for the majority of class today. So if you click on that panel, it will expand it. If you have other panels expanded, if you just click next to their name, it will minimize it for you. So we just want to focus on Lumetri Color, so that will be the only panel that I have expanded today. So under the basic correction tab, this is where we are going to find our tools for basic color editing. And if you'll notice, I'm going to minimize basic correction real quick, but under Lumetri Color, there's even more panels. So we have the basic correction panel, creative, curves, color wheels and match, HSL secondary, and the vignette. And so from curves through vignette, these are all fairly advanced. So we're not going to be touching these panels at all today. We'll be doing our color correction in this basic correction tab, and then we'll move to the creative tab when we start a little more about color grading or kind of setting a mood or a tone for your images. So I'm going to go ahead and expand the basic correction tab real quick again. And then under here, we have quite a few different options. First, I'm going to show us this auto option. So if you'll notice right here where I'm circling, there is a button that says auto. I'm going to go ahead and click it. And when we click that, if you'll pay attention over here, here we go. Premiere does its best to do what it thinks this should look like. So it has made a bunch of different changes, which we can see here. When we first started, all of our sliders were down the center, but they've made some adjustments here and we can see all the values that were changed. Right up at the top of the Lumetri Color panel, next to where it says Lumetri Color right here, you see there's a little button that says FX. I'm going to click on that real quick, and what that does is basically hides these edits so you can see your original image. So I'm going to do that real quick. Okay, and that's toggled these off. So this is what our clip originally looks like. I'm going to toggle that back on, and that is what it looks like with the auto Lumetri corrections that was applied. So I'm going to do that one more time, just because I know when you're watching on Zoom, it can be a little hard to see. So original clip and our auto. So we can see they definitely increased our exposure a little bit. And yeah, it got a little bit brighter. So that's a good place to start, is to see what Premiere will do for you for your correcting. I tend to find, depending on the project, I don't always like what they have done here. So there's a couple options. You can either start with what they have determined is best and then begin making some changes, or you can just completely reset and start on your own path. And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and press reset right here. Okay. And I'm going to demonstrate what all of these mean. And so we'll talk about these going down pretty much from top to bottom here. So I'm going to start with the light panel actually right here. So up first, we've got exposure. So exposure is a pretty common photography and videography term. It's basically the amount of light that's being let into your frame. In film, exposure is very important while you're actually capturing the images. But luckily, with the more digital format of video footage nowadays, exposure can be adjusted for if your original clip was not ideal, if it was maybe overexposed or underexposed. So if we want to play with our exposure, so that amount of light in our frame, and I'll want you guys to be kind of watching over here, but the way you can do that, we have a slider bar here. So there's a couple different ways that we can move our values. We can either click on the circle and then drag it to the right. That's going to be increasing our exposure, and you'll notice that's happening on the screen here. We can pretty much almost completely blow out the image with way too much brightness. And then you can drag it to the left-hand side, and that is going to make it much darker. Another way you can move this slider, you can click over here. There's numbers, and you can actually put in whatever value you want it to be. Whenever I'm color editing, I don't tend to do that. I I never really know. I really personally like the color slider. It really allows you to see your changes in real time. But if you happen to know exactly what all these numbers need to be, you can do that. Another option is if you want to select the number and then use the up arrow on your keyboard or the down arrow on your keyboard. That's going to walk you through this entire slider as well. But it does that in pretty big jumps. If you'll notice, the circles jumping quite a bit with each button press. So again, I don't really like either of those two options just personally. I tend to just slide the slider along. So that's how I'm going to continue to do it for the rest of class. One quick tip, if you would like to reset to the original for just one of these elements, so for example, exposure, you can double click anywhere along that line and it will reset it back to what it originally was. All right, so underneath exposure, we have contrast, and contrast describes tones. So specifically the relationship between the darkest and brightest parts of an image. If the difference between the darkest and lightest portions of an image is vast, so for example, if the shadows are very dark and the highlights are very bright, an image is said to have high contrast. When an image is more gray and there's less difference between the light and dark portions of the image, it has low contrast. So for this clip, I think it actually works best when we focus, and I actually just realized real quickly, I'm going to fix my frame. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're going to focus, I think, on the hands here is one of the best places we can see it. So for contrast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by increasing our contrast. So right here, we're going to look at kind of our lighter parts of our image versus the darker parts of our image. And as I move it up, we can see our lighter parts getting a little bit brighter. And then if you'll notice the shadows, so for example, if you can see the shadows underneath the hands, those are getting darker. I'm going to start back from the middle and gradually do that again so you guys can see how this gets brighter and our shadows get darker. So our colors become a little more pigmented and a little more vibrant. Now, if we go the opposite way and reduce our contrast, that's where we're going to start to see these colors come a little more in line with each other. And eventually, when we get down to the bottom, it's pretty much going to be fairly, I won't say monochromatic, but it's very grayed out. And we can see the difference between our bright part here and our shadows here is not as intense as it was up here. So that's what contrast does. And then up next, we've got highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So white and black is going to focus on bringing up the white values or the black values of the image, and that affects the entirety of your frame. And then highlights and shadows only will affect either your lightest part for the highlights or the darkest part for the shadows of your image. So I tend to edit whites and blacks first so that we can bring the tonal ranges for the entire image up or down, because this is where you're going to be determining what's called your white point and your black point. So the white point is going to be the brightest point of your image, and the black point is the darkest point of your image. And then we can hop into highlights and shadows where you play within those ranges that you just set. So let me just kind of demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to start by first adjusting whites. So here on the slider, I'm going to bring it up to the right. And if you'll notice, if we focus on some of our brighter parts, those are all increasing. But this is bringing up our tones all over. So also look at our shadows under here, and you'll notice our shadows are being brightened as well. As I slowly move that up, it's not as intense with the shadows, but it is adjusting overall for this whole image. Let me go back to where it was, and then I'm going to slowly move it back up all the way. We can see the entire picture, even our shadowed areas was getting a little bit brighter there. Now that's opposed to highlights. So for highlights, I'm going to go ahead and move to the right of the slider here. And I want you to notice how for the most part, it's going to be our highlights. So for example, the tops of the hands where light is hitting their hands, and our spatula here, that's going to be affected. And for the most part, our darker parts back here should remain unaffected. So for highlights, I'm going to drag to the right to add some more highlights in. And I'm going to drag it back down and do that one more time slowly for you guys. Focus again on the hands. Those are going to get real bright because those are a highlighted bit. And we can notice back here didn't change too much. Now for highlights, if we go to the left hand of the slider, we're going to be removing highlights. So we're going to end up with a darker image. I'm going to reset that. And then blacks, if I bring this all the way to the right, we'll see kind of the overall image is going to be affected and start to get, with blacks, it's actually the opposite. As you move to the right of the slider, it's going to be removing the black values. So it's going to be actually getting brighter. And if you move it to the left, you'll be adding more in. So that's when you're going to get the deeper, darker tones that are coming out. So like you'll notice here on our spatula, even that is being affected when I'm moving this slider a little bit. And then we'll do the shadows real quick as well. For shadows, let's focus here underneath the hands, maybe back here by the plaid shirt. We should see those deepening as I move the slider down. And yeah, they're getting real dark, but our highlights aren't too affected. You can see a little bit, but for the most part, our highlights remain where they are, and it's just those darker areas that are being affected. Okay, so those are basic options here under light. Any questions? We've covered quite a few things already.
We don't seem to have any questions yet in the chat, but yeah, I'll let you know if any pop up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jess. All right, so one more thing I wanted to point out here. We have white balance right up here. And what this does, you can either manually select your white balance or you can use um, the white balance selector, which is this little dropper here. And what this does is you're basically going to be telling the software what in this image is supposed to be a true white tone. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this dropper and then move over to my video over here. You guys can see my mouse has turned into a dropper down here by the spatula. So I'm going to go ahead and actually click on the spatula and we'll say that this is what is supposed to be the true white tone in this image. And I want you guys to watch over here how that changes all of our values over here. So we can see here it changed our temperatures. And I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off real quick so you guys can watch and see how that changed from our original, which is pretty yellowy, is very warm. And when I toggle those edits on, we notice a lot more cooler tones have been brought in, and that makes sense because with that white balance adjustment, it brought our temperature down. So you can also manually set your white balance, and you would do that by adjusting this temperature, tint, and saturation options right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just reset these real quick. And then the way you would do that, you would basically just eyeball what you're wanting to be the white point in your image. So I'm going to be looking at this spatula, and then you just start moving the sliders until it looks how you are wanting it to look. You'll usually have to do some kind of a balance between if you're cooling off the temperature here. So temperature, when we move to the left, that's going to be cooler. As we move to the right, it's going to be warmer. And then for tints, as we move to the left, we're going to get into the green. And then as we move to the right, we get into more magenta. So usually when you're playing with these, you'll have to do adjusting of kind of both of them to balance them out. But I find that to be very hard unless you're really good with color. So I do tend to default to using this dropper if I'm wanting to help have some help with my overall tone in my video. And then right here underneath temperature and tint, there is a saturation option. And saturation is basically just the intensity of the color or the pigmentation. So bringing it all the way down to the left, we will get a monochromatic black and white. And then if we bring it all the way up to the right, we're going to get very vivid colors, very intense and pigmented colors. And I'm going to return it back to where it originally was. Okay, so that is most of our options available to us here in just our basic correction tab. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to this creative tab. And this is where things really start to get fun. And we can review some basic tools that you can get started with the color grading part, which I think is what draws a lot of people into color editing. And that's where you can kind of start setting a tone or a mood for your video. So for our color grading, I'm actually going to move to our butterfly clip, which is the last clip that I dragged in here. And I'm real quick going to adjust that real quick. All right, there we go. So under the creative tab here, the first option is this look option. Right now it says none. If I click on it, it is going to give us a lot of options here. And what these are basically presets, or you can think of them like filters that have already been loaded into Premiere. So I'm going to go ahead and click through a few of them so you guys can see how that changes. And again, these are just like if you want to think about them like filters on Instagram, that's exactly how these work. They're already set to a certain look. So just to show you guys a couple different options here. So you can always sort through here, especially if you're new to color editing in Premiere. It's always kind of nice to start with something that somebody else has already kind of set up. So there's lots of options available to you in Premiere, but there's also the option down here, it says browse. There are packages that you can find from people and artists online who will release different preset filters for Premiere. So if you ever find something that you like online, you can always download it and add it into here. We're going to actually stick, though, I think with this blue cold filter for now to talk about some of these other sliders that are available to us under here. So right underneath, we have, it is called intensity, and this is basically going to be the opacity of that preset. So it starts in the middle at 100. As I drag the slider to the left, you'll notice, and you'll have to watch pretty hard over here, but it's going to slowly remove that preset. So I'm going to go back to the middle. We see we've got lots of blues. As I move to the left, it's getting more and more back to the original until it's just not there anymore. And then if we go to the right, it's going to really increase that until it's pretty harsh. But that's just the opacity. So I'm going to return that back to that original. And then under here for adjustments, there is faded film, sharpen, vibrance, and saturation. So faded film is exactly what it sounds like. We can give the appearance of faded film to your image. So I'm just going to go ahead and move that slider. And that one actually starts all the way down here because there is no fade on your image until you include it. So I'm going to go ahead and just move that up, and you guys can watch over here how that kind of changes. And you can really start to tell pretty much at that halfway point. And now you can kind of see how it looks like an older film clip, maybe. I'm going to toggle that off real quick. Yeah, and then back on. Oh, sorry, that actually toggles off all of the corrections. So that didn't do exactly what I wanted it to. But yeah, faded film. We're going to bring it back down. Okay, and no fade. Up next is sharpen. So moving the slider to the right is going to really bring out and sharpen the details in your photo. And while moving it down to the left is going to almost blur the image a bit and take out some of the details. So what I'm going to do is actually move this to where we can really see the butterfly's wings. Let's see. Okay, right there, because I think this is a really good image for you guys to focus on the wings here. As I move the sharpen up to the right, you'll notice it gets almost a little grainy. And so that's why you have to be careful with this sharpen tool. Getting all the way up to the top. And I don't know how well you guys can see it on Zoom, but if you have the ability to get into Premiere and play with it, you would notice this is very grainy now compared to where we started. And now if we'll continue looking at the wing here, I'm going to bring that sharpen all the way down to the left, so giving it a blur. And actually, I'm not even all the way down to the left yet, and I think you can see this is much more blurred than it was before. I'm going to bring it all the way down, and we can see it looks out of focus now. So I'm going to bring that back up to the middle. So be careful with that sharpen. It's very easy to go overboard and move this slider too far to the right and then get an unintentionally grainy photo. And then we have vibrance and saturation. So both vibrance and saturation are going to strengthen the intensity of the color in your image. However, they do so differently. So saturation is going to intensify all of the colors in your images. So let's look at what that looks like. I'm going to bring my slider to the right, and you'll notice all of our colors are just going to get more vibrant, a little more pigmented, very intense. And then if we bring it back down to the left, we're going to be taking that saturation out, and you'll see we're starting to get grayed out, and we're going to end up at the very end, and we're back to monochromatic black and white. And then vibrance, I'm going to reset that actually. Vibrance is a little more specific than saturation. So saturation, we noticed it affected all of the colors on the screen. But vibrance is only focused on what they call the mid-tones of the image. So not the highlights and not our shadows, but our more mid-tones. So for this image, our mid-tones are pretty much, I think the best place to view them is here on our butterfly. Most of this butterfly is going to be a mid-tone. Some of this kind of brown bit of the tree is as well. But as I move this vibrant slider to the right, if you'll focus on the butterfly, you'll see the butterfly is getting a little more vibrant, but you'll notice our shadows and our highlights don't really change. So let me do that real quick, move into the right. You can see the butterflies getting oranger, but if you guys noticed, our shadow and our highlight really did not change. It was just this butterfly here. Let me bring it back down to where we were quickly so you can maybe see. Yeah, so original, bringing up the vibrance, and it really focused on the butterfly. You can see a little bit in the shadows and highlights, but for the most part, it's focused here on our midtones. And I'm going to bring it all the way down to the left. And again, when we go all the way to the left, it's like saturation. We're really taking lots of color out here. But we can see for the most part, it's affected the butterfly. I want you guys to see the difference between the vibrance and the saturation. So here there's absolutely no color. We can see black and white. I wouldn't be able to tell what color this butterfly is. With the vibrance, we can see it affects it a little bit differently. We're still keeping some of our colors in there. So again, with these color editing tools in Premiere, it's really great if you have access to getting in here and playing around because all of this is going to look different from clip to clip. All right, underneath we have two color wheels. On the left, it is called our shadow tint wheel. And on the right, we have our highlight tint wheel. So this is going to help us tint our highlights and our shadows. So first, what I'm going to do is reset our image here to our original. And there we go. I didn't want any other edits affecting how I show this to you guys. Um, what we're going to do here, I am going to bring our shadows down and make our shadows more green. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So you can either click and drag anywhere on the circle, and that will bring up this little plus sign that you can then drag around. It's very slow though. You can drag it around the circle and find the color that you're wanting to tint your shadows. And I'm hoping you guys can see as I move this to the green that it's really affecting our shadows down here. We can see it does affect our highlights a little bit, but for the most part, it's really getting intense in those shadows there. And so for highlights, I'm going to show you guys there's another way you can also just click anywhere on the circle, which I find is actually a lot faster. So you can click anywhere on the circle. And here I'm going to put our highlights into the pink. And so we can see here our highlights are really focused up here in the sky. That's obviously a highlighted bit, and that has turned all pink. And we can look down here at our shadows, and we can see that is where that green is really coming out. We talked about the butterfly is more of a mid-tone, so that is why it's being affected by both of these because it's kind of in the center. But we can see our shadows are pretty strongly green, and our highlights are pretty strongly pink up here. If you wanted to reset this, you can just double click on the wheel, just like we can double click on these lines, and that's going to reset it to the base. And then there's also this tint balance. Real quickly, I'm going to bring our shadow tint back to green and our highlight tint back to pink. And then if we move our slider to the right, it emphasizes our shadows more. So look how it's going to bring out our green shadows a little bit more. Yeah. And if I bring it to the left, it's going to emphasize our highlights. So if you'll look up here with our highlights, ooh, wow. Yeah, you'll see that getting really intense there. And it's overtaking the whole image actually. Okay, I'm going to reset that and reset that. Okay, so that was all I plan to cover here in the creative tab. I have some tips and tricks coming up next, and then a cool color masking thing at the very end. Do we have any questions before we move on, though?
It does not look like we have any questions at the moment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, so now that we've covered those basics of color correction and color grading, and hopefully I've provided you guys enough information to get into Premiere and start playing with your options, I did just want to talk about some additional tools and tips that are helpful in the color editing process. So first, you can actually save your color edits to a preset. Okay. Apologies. We had some tech support issues. I'm going to wait a few seconds, see if we get anyone to rejoin us. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Let's see. And Jess, would you be able to confirm that that is sharing properly?
Yes, your screen is perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm going to wait just a few more seconds here. All right, yeah. So again, apologies for the technical difficulties. We did unfortunately lose our connection there. So I'm going to pick back up pretty much right where we had left off. So that was talking about saving your settings to a preset. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and hop to a new clip. We've been staring at this butterfly for a while, and I'm going to hop to this clip of sand. And first, what we'll need to do so I can show you that you can save your changes is we need to make some changes. So I'm going to go ahead and hop back into our basic correction tab. And what I'm going to do is going to be pretty drastic, but it's just so that you can really see the changes. So I'm going to bring our temperature really down, make it very blue. I'm going to up our exposure a little bit. I'm going to bring our shadows down. And I'm just making various changes so that we can see these when we create our preset. So let's say that we have made these changes. We really like the look that we've achieved here, and it's a look that we might want to use in future projects or even on clips later on in this project. We can save these edits as a preset that can easily be accessed later. So to do that, we're going to come up to the top of the Lumetri Color panel, click on these three little lines at the right-hand corner of the panel, and then click Save Preset. When we do that, that's going to bring up our Save Preset window here, and we can name our preset. So I'm going to go ahead and name this Class Preset 1. And then if you would like, you can put a descriptor in here. So I find this is really helpful if you're working collaboratively with someone on a project. You can put a description in here for when this preset should be used. Maybe that this is a cool toned preset with exposure modified. You can put whatever you would like in there, or you can put nothing at all. So for now, I'm going to put nothing at all and press OK. And now we should have that preset saved and available for us to apply to other video clips in our creative tab. So if we remember when we were reviewing the creative tab, this look option is where we can access our presets. So I'm actually going to go ahead and move to our day at the beach clip and then apply that preset. So here from look, I'm going to click right there. And then I am going to look for class preset 1. Oh, and I'm so sorry. I actually that is not how you find your preset. Where you actually will find your preset is up here in the effects panel. So I'm going to minimize our Lumetri color. It's up here in effects. So I'm going to expand effects panel. And then here we will find that we have a presets. Here we go, Lumetri presets folder. And then we can navigate to, let's see, where did it go? I think there might have been I apologize, guys. I think there might have been a little update since the last time I was in here because now I'm not finding I'm sorry. It's not the Lumetri presets. It's presets. Apologies. So it's presets up here, and we can see I've had a couple other presets I've done for other classes, but we chose class preset 1. So here it is. And this is now just basically an effect that we can apply to our other clips. So I'm going to click and hold and then drag it and drop it on top of the clip that I'm wanting to apply that to. All right, and once I've done that, we can now see here that it applied that. We saw we got bluer, we got cooler, so our effect is on there. Now, if we wanted to remove that effect, you could do that. If you right click on the clip that you applied it to, you can come up here at the top, it says remove attributes. And then right here, we'll make sure that it's selected that we want to remove that Lumetri color preset, press OK. And then it's removed and we're back to our original spot that we started with this video clip. All right, another thing that you can do if you maybe are not wanting to save a preset that can be accessed in multiple different projects, so across different projects, if you're just wanting to copy the edits you've made on one clip in your project to another clip in your project, you can also do that. So we're going to do that I'm going to move back to this sand one. And for this one, I'm actually going to zoom into our timeline just a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing down here. But you can either right click and then press copy, or if you like to use keyboard shortcuts, you can do Control C to copy. And then you'll want to select the video or the clip that you're wanting to apply that to. And I want to apply it to our day at the beach here. So I'm going to make sure that is selected in my timeline. And then you can either right click and select paste attributes, or if you like the keyboard shortcuts, you can click Control Alt V. And that's going to bring up our paste attributes option. So for here, we're going to want to make sure that we have the box next to Lumetri Color selected because that is the attribute we're wanting to move over to this clip. I'm going to press OK. And then we can see it has successfully applied that, and it turned our image much cooler and much brighter. If we wanted to remove that, we could do that the same way that I just showed you for the last clip. So right click and then remove attributes. You could also check this reset button in the Lumetri Color panel, which is what I just did to get that reset there. Okay, one more thing I wanted to talk about before we move on to our mask, which I think we have a little bit of time to get to that part as well, but is adjustment layers. So adjustment layers can be added for both color correcting and grading instead of applying those changes directly to your clip. So if you're familiar at all with Photoshop, adjustment layers work just like layers in Photoshop. So you would be applying effects to a layer that can then be applied to multiple clips. And then you could go into just that layer and make adjustments as opposed to having to go into individual clips and making multiple adjustments. So to add an adjustment layer, what you will do is come down here in the bottom left-hand side to our navigation panel. There's a little sticky note at the bottom right-hand side of this panel called New Item. If you click on that, you get a lot of options, and the fourth one down is called Adjustment Layer. You can go ahead and click that, and then for here, for our purposes today, we don't have to change any of this, so we're just going to press OK. And then it puts that adjustment layer into our panel over here with all of our project working exercise files. So we can see here it's called Adjustment Layer. And what you'll need to do is click and hold and then drag it on to your V2 track because you're going to want to make sure that you have this adjustment layer on top of whatever clips you're wanting to apply the effects in that adjustment layer to. So for right now, it's just a layer. We haven't made any changes to it. So I'm going to make sure I have the layer selected and clicked. And then over here, I'm going to come to my Lumetri Color panel. And let's make a change for exposure. And again, just so you guys can really see it, I'm going to make it very exaggerated. So I'm going to really increase the exposure here. And we can see as I drag my playhead, the second that this blue playhead is outside of that adjustment layer, that adjustment has stopped. So if we want to drag out that layer to include the whole clip, you can do that. And you can drag it out to include multiple clips. So now we can see our adjustment layer is spanning multiple clips. And as we move through all the clips, we should notice that they are all super overexposed. So you can add multiple adjustment layers as well. So if you wanted to add another adjustment layer and work on your temperature in that adjustment layer, you could do that. You could layer them up as often as you'd like. You can continue adding tracks. If you right click over here in this blank space next to the track, you can continue adding tracks. So you can have a lot of different layers, and it just makes your workflow a little easier depending on your project. So that's adjustment layers. We've got a couple minutes left. So we are going to go ahead and cover masking, which is a really cool option. So again, if you're familiar with Photoshop, you might recognize the term masking, and it does work in a pretty similar way. But basically, you can use the masking feature to apply color editing to specific portions of your frame or specific objects instead of the whole frame. Before I show you guys how to do that, I would highly recommend, this is just another workflow tip, but that you color correct the whole frame and your whole video, get it where you want it to be before you start adding masks in. Because if you have to add your mask in and then you decide you need to change a part of your image that's not in the mask, you then create another back and forth because then you'll have to go in and edit your mask because that's going to change. So workflow wise, do that color correcting first, then work on your color grading, and then come in and put any masks that you might need to lay down. So for this mask, we're actually going to move to our day at the beach clip. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this adjustment layer because I do not want it there anymore. So we're going to be working on this day at the beach clip. And I'm going to move to the very end of the video. If you guys can see, we have got, move this bitter. Okay, we've got some water down here, and then we have a tree line up here. Overall, our image is fairly overcast. So what I'm going to do first is make our water look bluer. So I'm going to adjust our temperature down here. And yeah, that looks a little bit better for me. And now what I want to do is, we noticed when we changed that, it changed our forest up here, made it a little more blue, and it's just not looking very green. So what I want to do is actually mask this forested section and really make it a vibrant green. So to do that, we are going to come back up into this effects panel on the right-hand side. And then let me minimize these that I opened. We're going to come into video effects and expand that folder. And then we're going to head to color correction. And then under here, there is this Lumetri Color. So what we're going to do with this, instead of dragging it down onto our timeline or onto a clip, we actually need to click and drag it over all the way to the left-hand side of our screen and drop it into our effects panel over here. So let me expand our effects panel just a little bit. So you can see it's been dropped over here. And I actually was using Lumetri Color earlier. That's why it's showing up twice. I'm going to go ahead and just remove one of them. So you can drag in if you need to again. So for example, if you don't see Lumetri Color over here anymore, you can always drag that effect back in. So now that we've got these options over here, we have our masking options here. I'm going to go ahead and choose this free draw. And since we're not focusing on creating something pretty today, I'm going to do a very, very rough outline of our forest back here, the part that I'm wanting to turn green. So if you're working on an actual project, you would definitely take a longer time creating your mask and making sure everything is properly encompassed. I'm just doing a very rough run for us here. Okay, and so now we have our layers masked. And what we can do now is head back to our Lumetri Color panel here on the right, so where we've been making all of our color edits, and we can adjust the color. So I'm gonna bring that tint way over to the green, which I know looks a little wild, but we're wanting to really emphasize the green over here. So now we've got our mask over here and we've got the green temperature affecting just our forested bit, not any of our water or our sky, which is great. However, if you'll notice, if I move my playhead on the timeline back through the video, that mask stays in the same spot on the screen. And that's not ideal. We don't want to start our video viewing green here and then watching it move up to the forest at the end. So what we actually need to do is set the mask path. So the way that you do that, we're going to head to our effects control panel over here. And underneath Lumetri Color, you'll notice it has given us an option for our mask here that we've laid down. And right underneath that is the mask path. Now, right now we're at the end of our clip. So what we are going to need to do is track the mask backwards because we need to track it to the beginning of the clip. So for that, here we go. It is this middle left hand facing arrow. I'm going to click on that to track the selected mask backward. So Premiere is going to use its technology to basically keep it in place throughout all of this video up here on the forested image. This does take a moment, so we're going to let this do its thing. I'll mention that if you had masked something in the middle of your video clip, so let's say we were here in the middle when we really saw the forest and our playhead was right here when we masked it, you would have to track both backward and forward because you need to account for your full clip. So over here with the mask path, the right hand facing solid triangle is to mask forward. Since we were luckily at the end of our clip, all we have to do is mask backwards. This is taking longer than usual, actually, but we're going to keep letting that go. While we're waiting, do we happen to have any questions in the chat?
Does not look like we have any questions.
Okay, thank you. All right. Wow, okay, well, while this is loading, I'll talk about what I'm going to show you guys once this is done loading and my controls come back to me over here. But right underneath the mask path, and I can't expand it right now, but this says mask feathering. And what this will do, if you're familiar with Photoshop, it's going to be the same concept, but it will basically feather the edges of your mask. So it's going to start with very harsh edges, and you'll be able to really see where it was drawn. Feathering is going to almost like expand the edge of your mask. And make it kind of blur out a little bit and it won't be as harsh of a line. So I'll be able to show you guys that in just a second once this finishes loading. Okay, just a little bit longer. I'm sorry, I know this is a process. That is the only thing, unfortunate thing with Premiere. It's got some really cool stuff, but sometimes taking advantage of all the options in it, you do have to wait because it's got to do its processing thing. Okay. While this is still loading, this was the last thing I was going to show you guys in Premiere. So I'm going to let this load and hop back to our PowerPoint real quick so I can talk about some upcoming programs and additional resources that are available to you all. And then hopefully when I'm done with this, we can hop back in and I can show you guys how that mask stays up in the tree line there. So we do really appreciate you all joining us for our virtual program today. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you for those that were able to rejoin us. But I would really like to remind you guys about the wonderful courses that you have access to through LinkedIn Learning with your library card. Jess, would you mind dropping the links into the chat for us? We've got two for you guys. There's one called the Introduction to Video Color Correction with Ashley Kennedy, and then also Fixing Video Color and Exposure Problems with Richard Harrington. These are both really great instructors on LinkedIn. They teach multiple different Premiere courses, and they're a really great resource. And then also be sure to just stay up to date with the Plano Public Library. You can follow our Facebook page, and you can also check out our blog at planolibrarylearns.org. Over there, you'll be able to find recordings of past programs and other materials, and you can also learn about how to take advantage of everything that the library does have to offer. You will receive a program survey after this program, and we'd really appreciate if you would give us your feedback. You can let us know what we did well, what we can improve on, or if there's anything specific that you're looking to learn, we can try to craft a class for you all. All right, I'm going to minimize the window though, and let's see. Okay, awesome. It's done its thing. So let's watch this video clip now. You guys can already see we don't have that green mask here, so that is a good indicator that it has worked. I'm going to just press play. And then we can see we're moving through our clip. And here's our green mask staying up in our beautiful trees. You guys can see I didn't do the best job with my mask up there. So you can definitely see that line, but that's actually a great time for me to show you guys the feathering. So I'm going to hop over here to the mask feather and I'm going to boost that up. I'm going to do very exaggerated just so you guys can really see kind of the blur that happens. You can see this dotted line. That's kind of where it's feathering it out to. So there's now a gradual fade from this line to that line. Let me play this real quick and you'll see that that line at the treetop is not so harsh. It's more faded out. So that's what feathering does. All right, we didn't create a project that we're going to export, so I'm not going to worry about the export process. I'm just going to hop back to our screen and we'll end on, are there any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Well, then, thank you guys again for joining us today. We do appreciate it. We hope to see you at future virtual programs, and we hope to see you in the library as well. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks.